Hey guys, today we're going on a prehistoric journey. Imagine standing in the middle of an ice age landscape, the air crisp and cold, the ground covered with snow and ice. Above you, the towering mammoths move gracefully across the terrain, their massive forms moving through the frozen tundra. But as you look around, there are more giants lurking in the distance. Giant sloths, woolly rhinoceroses, saber-toothed cats, creatures the size of small buildings, their very existence an awe-inspiring spectacle. And while these creatures were real, what about the things that were even bigger, things that no one alive today has ever seen? You probably won't survive this if you don't keep your wits about you in the face of these massive creatures. After all, while mammoths may be one thing, it's the skeletal remains of other giant animals, those from a time far earlier, that would soon baffle and intrigue you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Early humans didn't have a word for dinosaurs, but they certainly encountered fossils, huge bones, strange skulls, and remnants of ancient, massive creatures that would have made them wonder. Could these bones be the remains of gods, ancient giants, or something else entirely? These discoveries shaped how early humans viewed their world, an earth full of mysteries, creatures, and stories that they couldn't fully explain. In this section, we'll explore what early humans thought when they stumbled upon the bones of long-extinct giants. Were they aware of the existence of creatures from ages past, or did they simply make their own stories from what they saw? As early humans ventured through the shifting landscapes of the Ice Age, they came across something truly perplexing: large, fossilized bones. Imagine coming across a massive bone, the size of your entire body, or a skull so large it could easily have belonged to a creature from another world. These discoveries were not rare. Across various parts of the world, early humans likely stumbled upon the bones of long-extinct megafauna, creatures that roamed the earth long before them, including mammoths, mastodons, and perhaps even early dinosaurs. But what did they think of these bones? How did they explain them? Historians still argue about whether early humans truly understood what they had found, or if they simply regarded the bones as something mysterious. Some anthropologists suggest that early humans, with their close connection to nature, likely recognized that these bones belonged to creatures from another time. However, others argue that without the scientific understanding we have today, they may have thought of these bones as belonging to mythical creatures, gods, or ancient giants. After all, if you were living in a world where mammoths were some of the largest creatures you'd ever seen, what would you make of even larger bones? The sheer size of these bones must have been enough to spark awe and fear. It's likely that early humans could not have conceived of the creatures that left behind such remains. The idea of a creature as massive as a mammoth or a giant sloth might have been too far outside their experience. These bones were perhaps not just fossils, but evidence of something divine or supernatural. Many cultures throughout history have attributed the remains of large creatures to gods or legendary beasts. Early humans likely didn't know what to make of these mysterious finds, so they may have created myths around them. Take, for example, the fossilized bones of giant animals like the mammoth. In prehistoric times, seeing such bones could have sparked the belief that these animals were once divine beings, perhaps the offspring of gods, or legendary monsters from the ancient past. In many cultures, huge bones were often linked to the existence of giants. In fact, one of the most intriguing possibilities is that the discovery of giant bones was the origin of many mythologies about huge creatures. The Greek myth of the Titans, for example, could have been influenced by the discovery of large bones from ancient creatures, with these bones being interpreted as the remains of gods or giants. But what about the more exotic fossils, those of dinosaurs, which early humans may have also encountered? While we can't know for sure if early humans stumbled upon dinosaur fossils specifically, the discovery of large, mysterious bones may have sparked the same types of myths. Historians continue to debate whether ancient humans could have encountered dinosaur fossils, considering the timeline of when humans appeared compared to when dinosaurs went extinct. While it's certain that humans never saw dinosaurs in the flesh, it is possible that fossils of dinosaurs were encountered in various parts of the world, either by humans who lived near rock layers that contained these fossils or through the migration of bones over time. In any case, the impact of these fossil discoveries on early humans was significant. They served as a tangible connection to a time long before their own existence. The fossils sparked curiosity, wonder, and fear. And as early humans searched for meaning in these discoveries, they turned to storytelling. The bones they found, once strange and unexplainable, began to take on new life through the myths they created. Giants, gods, and monsters were born from the massive bones they unearthed, shaping the stories they told their children and preserving a sense of mystery and awe for generations. These fossils weren't just remnants of ancient creatures, they were the building blocks of legends. Whether they believed they had found the remains of extinct animals or the relics of divine beings, early humans used their discoveries to explain the unexplainable, to make sense of their world. The mysteries of the past, passed down in stories, would form the foundation of the mythology that has lasted through the ages. As early humans encountered these strange fossils, the bones of long-extinct creatures became more than just curious artifacts. They were seeds for myth and legend. What were these giant creatures, and why had they disappeared? Early humans, whose survival depended on understanding the world around them, likely interpreted these bones through the lens of their own experiences, blending what they saw with their spirituality and the mysterious forces of nature they revered. It's fascinating to think about how early humans processed the remains of these creatures, often leaving us with the question of whether they saw them as gods, monsters, or just remnants of a forgotten world. Historians still debate whether early humans believed that these massive creatures had been real or whether they saw them as mythical beasts woven into the fabric of their spiritual beliefs. Some experts believe that the bones of creatures like mammoths were simply regarded as the remains of animals that once roamed the earth, but that early humans had no understanding of their true nature. Others argue that prehistoric humans likely saw these remains as symbols of something much greater, creatures of immense power, and that these fossils were associated with the gods or with ancestral spirits. It's entirely possible that the sight of enormous skulls, tusks, and bones became an essential part of rituals, treated as sacred objects to be revered or feared. One of the most compelling aspects of this is the way that these bones might have contributed to the creation of myths and legends. Consider the size of a mammoth skull. If you stumbled across it, how would you explain it? To a person with no knowledge of extinction or paleontology, the presence of such massive bones could have seemed like a sign of something supernatural, something beyond the realm of everyday life. The stories that arose from these discoveries were probably not about understanding the biology of these animals, but about interpreting them as larger-than-life figures in a spiritual context. Early humans would have likely created stories about giant creatures roaming the earth in the distant past, offering explanations for the bones they found and the world they lived in. The idea of creatures that were once alive but now gone seems almost as mysterious as the idea of dinosaurs themselves. This process of mythologizing the bones was essential to understanding the world. Stories were a way of explaining and coping with the mysteries around them. Early humans might have created gods based on the bones of these great creatures, seeing the massive size of these animals as a reflection of divine strength. What better way to explain the remains of something so enormous than to attribute it to a divine being or a legendary monster? This wasn't limited to just the mammoth. Early humans could have come across the bones of giant sloths or the towering skeletons of creatures like the megatherium, the enormous ground sloth. These creatures, whose sheer size dwarfed the animals of the time, were just as likely to spark myths and stories. How could early humans, who were primarily used to encountering animals like deer or smaller predators, explain the presence of such monstrous beings? In some parts of the world, It's even speculated that the presence of such massive bones inspired stories of giants or massive, unkillable creatures. After all, humans had their own large predators, such as saber-toothed cats, and while they were certainly formidable, they didn't compare to the sheer immensity of the ancient megafauna. The giant bones were like the remnants of a forgotten time, filled with mystery and awe. Interestingly, the remains of these creatures didn't just serve as fodder for stories, they likely played a role in the rituals of early humans. Just as bones were often used in shamanistic rituals and ceremonies, so too would these enormous remains have been treated with reverence. They were not just relics of the past, but symbols of something much larger, symbols of the power, the mystery, and the forces at work in the world. Early humans were surrounded by the mysteries of the unknown, and these bones provided a tangible connection to those mysteries, reinforcing their beliefs and giving them a sense of order in an ever-changing world. This mythological thinking wasn't confined to just the bones of prehistoric creatures, it extended to the environment itself. The landscape was shifting, the animals were changing, and the climate was no longer as predictable as it once had been. But within this uncertainty, the stories of giant creatures and the spirits of the land gave early humans a framework through which they could understand their place in the world. The bones of these ancient creatures helped explain the unknown and reinforce the belief that the natural world was a place full of mysteries, both frightening and awe-inspiring. As early humans continued to encounter these giant bones, their interpretations began to influence how they viewed their world, transforming the unknown into something they could understand. The remains of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and even creatures like giant tortoises were not just strange relics. They were clues that helped early humans make sense of the chaotic world around them. In the absence of modern scientific knowledge, the bones were part of a much larger narrative, one woven into the fabric of their spiritual and cultural beliefs. Let's consider what would have happened if an early human came across a massive mammoth tusk. The size alone would have left them in awe. The tusks of mammoths could reach over 10 feet long. Imagine holding one, feeling the weight and the power it must have once held. How would you explain such an enormous artifact in a world without the concept of extinction? These bones weren't just pieces of a dead animal. They were a testament to the size, power, and mystery of something ancient. It's likely that humans began to imbue these objects with meaning. Perhaps they thought the mammoth's tusks were tools of the gods, or perhaps the bones themselves were seen as the remains of some kind of divine protector. Historians still argue about the specific nature of early human beliefs regarding these bones. Some suggest that prehistoric people believed the bones belonged to legendary beasts that once roamed the earth, while others believe that the remains of these creatures were thought to be the remains of gods who had once lived among humans. In some cases, the bones of these large creatures were used in rituals, perhaps for protection, for fertility, or to ensure successful hunts. These rituals may have included burying the bones, crafting them into talismans, or offering them to the spirits in an attempt to connect with the divine. Interestingly, the bones were also used for practical purposes. Early humans often fashioned tools and weapons out of bones, including those of giant animals like mammoths and megafauna. The bones were incredibly durable, making them ideal for carving and shaping into tools. It's possible that the same bones which were seen as sacred or divine were also used for survival, transforming these remains into something more functional. The tusks of mammoths, for example, were often carved into spear points or used as handles for tools. The duality of these bones, both sacred and practical, demonstrates how early humans integrated the unknown into their daily lives. But beyond their spiritual significance, the bones also likely sparked curiosity. The discovery of these remains must have raised questions about the animals themselves. What kind of creature could have existed to leave behind such enormous bones? Did it live alongside us? Was it a predator? Or perhaps a god? These questions undoubtedly fueled early human imaginations. Perhaps some stories began to take shape around these fossils, stories of massive beasts that roamed the earth in the distant past, beyond human memory. Early humans, ever resourceful, may have linked these animals to the natural world, seeing them as larger-than-life representations of the forces they battled every day, the wild animals, the weather, and the unforgiving landscapes they called home. The connection between the fossils and myth goes beyond just the stories they inspired. It's about how these bones were integrated into a broader cultural understanding of the world. Imagine sitting around a fire, telling stories of the great beasts that once roamed the land, feeling the weight of the bones in your hands as you explain their significance. These bones didn't just provide physical evidence of an ancient past, they represented a bridge to a more mystical understanding of the world. The earth was not just a place of survival, it was full of stories and spirits. And these bones, whether mammoth tusks, saber-toothed skulls, or even the bones of ancient reptiles, helped connect early humans to the vast, unknown world that existed before them. The more humans discovered, the more their understanding of the natural world became intertwined with spiritual and cultural beliefs. These fossils didn't just belong to the animals of the past, they were relics of a world that connected humanity to a larger, mysterious cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Whether they were seen as the remnants of gods, ancient spirits, or monstrous creatures, the bones represented something bigger than just the animals that once walked the earth. They symbolized the enduring power of nature and the deep, spiritual connection early humans had to the land. As early humans encountered these colossal bones, their awe and curiosity grew, shaping not just their myths, but also their rituals and relationships with the world around them. The bones didn't just represent ancient creatures, they were woven into the very fabric of the humans' spiritual lives. These discoveries, much like the land they inhabited, were imbued with mystery and perhaps even reverence. These remains weren't simply the vestiges of a world that had passed. They were reminders of a time long gone, of creatures so mighty they could not have been anything less than legendary. The sheer size of these bones sparked a flood of questions and wonder. What could have caused such massive creatures to disappear? Early humans didn't have a concept of extinction. They didn't know that these creatures had died out long before they arrived on the scene. Instead, they might have viewed them as remnants of a forgotten age, something that had once been part of their world, but had since vanished. The absence of these giant creatures would likely have been just as puzzling to them as the fossils themselves. If they weren't extinct, then where did they go? And more importantly, why were their bones left behind? These unanswered questions probably fueled many of the myths and stories passed down through generations, with these giant creatures often becoming central figures in creation stories or folklore. Historians still argue whether early humans fully understood the concept of extinction. Some suggest that they may have thought the large creatures had simply moved to far-off lands, perhaps to areas where humans didn't venture. Others believe that early humans simply accepted the idea that these creatures were gone, without realizing that they would never return. But it's almost certain that these bones sparked a deeper connection with the past, a connection that influenced their worldview and their spiritual beliefs. The bones were more than relics, they were physical links to the unseen world. Early humans likely treated these remains with great respect, using them in rituals or offering them as sacrifices to spirits or gods. These practices, which are so common in the mythology of ancient cultures, may have originated from these encounters with ancient bones. Imagine how an early human might have felt upon discovering the enormous skull of a mammoth or the jagged teeth of a saber-toothed cat. To hold such a powerful, ancient artifact would have been nothing short of awe-inspiring. These bones weren't just souvenirs of a distant past, they were pieces of something much larger. In a world where everything from weather patterns to the creatures that roamed the earth seemed governed by unseen forces, these bones could have represented a spiritual connection to the vast unknown. The integration of these bones into their religious practices would have been a way for early humans to understand and control the world around them. These bones weren't just remnants of past beasts, they became powerful symbols. They could have been used in sacred rituals, carried as talismans, or placed in burial sites to protect the dead. Some ancient cultures would later use bones in divination rituals, seeking answers from the spirits by casting bones or reading their markings. It's possible that early humans, upon finding these fossils, saw them not as remains of animals, but as portals to another realm, an ancient world they could not fully understand, but felt a profound connection to. These fossils also likely served as inspiration for early art. Cave paintings, carvings, and sculptures, many of which have been uncovered by archaeologists, often feature large animals, including mammoths, bison, and other prehistoric creatures. The presence of these creatures in art suggests that early humans were not just interacting with them physically, but also mentally and spiritually. The remains of these creatures may have served as the basis for these depictions, as humans sought to immortalize the majestic beings that once roamed their world. As these bones were incorporated into spiritual and artistic practices, they also became part of a larger tradition of storytelling. Myths were born, and these great creatures were woven into the narrative fabric of early human existence. Creatures like mammoths may have evolved into symbols of strength, resilience, or ancient power. The extinction of these creatures, whether understood as a loss, a blessing, or an unexplained event, became part of the mythological and cultural identity of early humans. The extinction was not just a biological process, it was a story. A story of giants who had walked the earth, leaving only their bones behind as a reminder of their once great existence. Early humans' relationship with these creatures was not just about survival, it was about meaning. The bones they found were more than physical remnants. They were metaphysical objects that helped early humans make sense of a world they couldn't fully comprehend. The fossils were a gateway to a larger, spiritual understanding of the world, a way of connecting with the past and understanding the forces that shaped their reality. The world was not just a place of harsh survival, it was a place of mysteries, stories, and meanings. The bones of ancient creatures, buried beneath the earth, held the keys to those stories. And it was these stories that helped early humans make sense of the ever-changing world around them. As early humans discovered these giant bones, their awe and reverence grew, so too did their understanding of the natural world. Over time, the bones of extinct creatures like mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats became woven into the tapestry of their daily lives and spiritual practices. But beyond the myths, the fossils played a crucial role in shaping not only their worldview, but also their evolving relationship with the land they lived on. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that these early humans could have begun to use the bones not just for spiritual reasons, but for practical purposes. Mammoth tusks, for example, were strong and durable, making them ideal for crafting tools. We know that early humans used bones for weapons, tools, and even art. So, while some bones were treated with great reverence, others may have been repurposed to help ensure survival in a harsh environment. The mammoth tusk could become a tool for scraping hides, or bones might be sharpened into spears or arrowheads. The ability to take something as sacred as a fossil and turn it into a functional tool was part of the resourcefulness that allowed early humans to adapt to the changing world. Historians still argue whether early humans used the bones of extinct creatures immediately after finding them, or if the practice of repurposing them developed over time as a necessity. Some experts suggest that early humans might have initially viewed the bones as sacred relics, but as time passed and practical needs arose, they began to recognize the usefulness of these materials. Other scholars argue that from the very beginning, early humans were highly resourceful, immediately seeing the utility in bones once they had the opportunity to examine them. Regardless of when it began, one thing is clear. Early humans saw the bones not just as a glimpse into a lost world, but as something that could aid them in their survival. The connection between the spiritual and the practical became a defining feature of early human life. The bones of these ancient creatures were part of the natural world, but they also represented a bridge to a past that humans didn't fully understand. They were relics of an age that existed long before humans arrived, and as such, they became part of a larger narrative that gave early humans context, purpose and meaning. The idea that these bones could be both practical and spiritual highlights how early humans viewed the natural world through a lens of balance and interconnectedness. Everything had a purpose, and even the remains of creatures that no longer walked the earth had meaning. This ability to adapt spiritually and practically was crucial for surviving in a world that was rapidly changing, both in terms of the environment and the animals that inhabited it. In addition to being tools, these fossils also played a role in early humans' understanding of death and life. The bones served as physical reminders of the past, the lives of creatures that had come before them, and perhaps even represented a connection to the afterlife. As early humans grappled with the disappearance of giant creatures, they might have started to question the nature of life and death. Were the bones a sign of what could happen to them? Did the creatures that once roamed the earth simply fade away, or were they taken by the gods, transformed into something else? The bones of these creatures likely raised deep existential questions, pushing early humans to explore the mysteries of life, death, and what might lie beyond. As the landscape transformed and the ice melted away, early humans were forced to adapt quickly not just to new ways of surviving, but to new ways of thinking about their place in the world. The animals and creatures they had once hunted and revered were no longer present in the same way. But through these bones, they connected to the past, to the giants that had once walked the earth, and to the mysteries that still surrounded them. In their myths and stories, in their use of bones as tools, early humans wove a complex web of survival, spirituality, and connection to the world around them. These bones, however, also left behind an important legacy, a legacy that would be passed down through generations. Over time, as humans evolved and began to master the art of agriculture, metalworking, and even city building, the bones of ancient creatures would slowly be replaced by new kinds of tools and technologies. But the stories, the myths, and the lessons learned from those early encounters with fossils would stay with humanity, influencing cultures and traditions for thousands of years to come. The bones of prehistoric creatures didn't just represent the end of one era. They represented a link to the beginning of another, one where humans were beginning to shape the world around them. These early discoveries gave rise to the first stories of giants and gods, to rituals and beliefs that helped early humans make sense of the vast, changing world they lived in. The bones, whether used for practical purposes or honored as sacred relics, became the foundation for humanity's ongoing relationship with the earth and all the mysteries it held. The bones of ancient creatures, with their size and mystery, didn't just spark spiritual beliefs or practical tools, they also ignited something even more profound, a new understanding of the world's history. As early humans began to grasp that these bones didn't belong to anything living today, they might have started to form the first ideas about time, history, and the cycles of life and death. These thoughts, while rudimentary, were the seeds of a much larger cultural shift that would define how humanity interacted with the world for millennia. Think about it, early humans lived in a world of constant change. The landscape shifted with the seasons, animals came and went, and the climate itself seemed to be in flux. But with the discovery of fossilized bones, humans may have begun to think of time not just as a series of seasons or years, but as a long, unfolding process, stretching back into a distant past. For the first time, humans could conceptualize that the world had once looked very different. The idea that massive creatures roamed the earth, only to vanish, likely sparked a new understanding of life's fragility. If these giant creatures could disappear, could humans be next? The idea of extinction, though not fully understood, may have been born from these fossils, giving humans a sense of the fleeting nature of existence. Historians still debate whether early humans understood extinction in the way we do today. Some argue that early humans didn't grasp the idea of extinction as a process. After all, without a scientific framework or a way to observe long-term changes, it would have been difficult to draw conclusions about species dying off. However, it's equally plausible that early humans, who were intimately connected to their environment, began to recognize patterns in the animals they saw and those they found in the fossilized remains. The evidence was their huge animals were no longer in their world, but their bones persisted. This may have led to early ideas about the cyclical nature of life and death, not just for individual creatures, but for entire species. In some ways, these ancient bones may have served as the first records of the Earth's history, much like how modern humans use written records and fossils today. Early humans had no written language, but they had their memory, their rituals, and their art. These bones, when found, could have been the basis for the first forms of storytelling and cultural transmission. Imagine the stories that were created around these remains, the stories of giants, of gods who once walked the earth, of creatures that were both revered and feared. These tales would have been passed down through generations, not just as entertaining myths, but as lessons about the world, about the forces that govern life and death, and about how to survive in a world that was always shifting. As the world continued to change, early humans likely started to see these fossils not just as strange curiosities, but as part of a bigger narrative, one that was both spiritual and deeply tied to their survival. The bones of these creatures were a reminder that life was a delicate balance. The earth and everything in it was constantly changing, and humans had to be prepared to adapt. These bones, in a way, represented both the past and the future, what was lost and what was still to come. As humans began to engage more with the world around them, both spiritually and physically, the presence of these bones became a way to connect with the larger forces of nature. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this period is that these early humans likely didn't view the bones just as remnants of the past. They saw them as keys to understanding the present and the future. The bones weren't just artifacts. They were symbols of what had come before, but also of what was possible for the future. As early humans adapted to the changing world around them, these bones helped them frame their place within it. They were more than just reminders of lost creatures. They were part of a larger conversation about life, survival, and the forces that shape everything. So, the next time you see a dinosaur fossil in a museum, remember that early humans encountered similar bones, but they had no idea about dinosaurs. Instead, they lived in a world where these bones were portals to the divine, to the unknown, and to the mysteries of life itself. The myths, rituals, and beliefs they created around these fossils weren't just about explaining what had happened. They were about understanding the world and making sense of a world that was both familiar and alien. The bones left behind by ancient creatures became more than just remnants. They became part of a larger, spiritual, and existential journey that helped early humans survive, adapt, and thrive in an ever-changing world. As early humans became more acquainted with the fossilized remains of long-extinct creatures, these discoveries likely influenced not only their spiritual practices, but also the very structure of their society. The bones, relics of a past that seemed both foreign and familiar, were not just objects to be admired. They were symbols of power, mystery, and connection. They were reminders that there was more to the world than the visible, tangible present. They carried with them an undeniable weight, both physical and metaphorical, that shaped how early humans understood their place in the world. The bones of mammoths, giant sloths, and even creatures like the saber-toothed tiger were not just seen as ancient remnants, they were seen as symbols of strength and dominance. Early humans, whose lives were so closely tied to hunting, survival, and the forces of nature, must have recognized the immense power of these creatures, not just in their physical form, but in their presence. The sheer size of the bones, the strength required to bring down such massive animals, must have led humans to believe that these creatures had once been the ultimate beings, rulers of the earth. This connection to power and strength could explain why these creatures became central to early human mythologies. In many cultures, the remains of large animals were seen as sacred or divine. The bones of the mammoth or the saber-toothed tiger weren't just relics. They were part of a larger cosmological understanding. These creatures were believed to have a role in the creation of the world, in maintaining balance, and in connecting the physical world with the spiritual. The bones were not just evidence of life in the past, they were thought to hold the key to understanding the forces that govern the present and the future. Consider the possibility that early humans used these bones in rituals not only to honor the past, but also to invoke the powers of these great creatures. The bones of such massive animals would have been a source of deep reverence. Early humans might have used them in ceremonies meant to invoke the strength and spirit of the creatures they revered. These rituals, woven into the fabric of early human life, were a way of connecting with the past, paying homage to the great beasts that had once roamed the earth, and seeking guidance from the spirits of those long-gone creatures. In a world where life was unpredictable and survival was uncertain, these bones may have provided both spiritual reassurance and a sense of power. The act of possessing such large and formidable remains likely gave humans a sense of control over the world they could barely understand. In times of hardship, the bones could have been viewed as a form of protection, a tangible connection to the strength and resilience of the creatures they symbolized. Moreover, these bones could have served as physical representations of the cyclical nature of life and death. The bones of the animals that had once roamed the earth, now lying in the soil, were reminders of the inevitable passage of time. As early humans adapted to the changing world around them, the remains of ancient creatures likely represented both an end and a beginning, symbols of life's cyclical nature and the possibility of transformation. The bones weren't just tools for survival or pieces of ancient history. They were artifacts with deep spiritual significance. They represented the link between the past and present, between the physical and spiritual worlds. For early humans, these discoveries were not just scientific curiosities, they were keys to understanding their place in a rapidly changing world. They didn't need to know about extinction or ancient history. They understood the deeper meaning behind these bones, that the world was full of mysteries, that life was a cycle, and that they, too, were part of something larger than themselves. As humans adapted to the warming world and faced new challenges, these bones, these remains of ancient creatures, would have continued to play a role in shaping their spiritual and cultural evolution. The rituals, stories, and myths surrounding these bones would have been passed down through generations, each layer adding depth and meaning to the understanding of the world. The bones of long-gone giants became not just relics of a forgotten time, but pillars of the human experience, symbols of strength, survival, and transformation. As early humans' relationship with the bones of extinct creatures deepened, their cultural and social practices began to evolve. The discovery of these giant fossils didn't just stay within the realm of the spiritual or symbolic, it also started to influence the ways in which early human societies structured themselves. The bones were not only metaphysical objects, they were pieces of a larger cultural puzzle. Their presence in rituals, their use in art, and the stories that grew around them served to strengthen community ties and create shared meanings within groups. The bones of these massive creatures likely became central in the development of early human art and storytelling. As humans began to settle into more permanent communities and form larger groups, they needed ways to bind themselves together. What better way to unite people than through shared myths and legends? These bones, which were often found in prominent places, became not just tools, but also symbols of collective identity. Early humans could have used the fossils as a way to create visual representations of their beliefs, art that portrayed the creatures that once roamed the earth, painted or carved into cave walls, tools, and ornaments. Historians argue whether this art was purely a form of expression or whether it had a more practical function. Some suggest that the artwork was a form of communication, a way of telling stories, teaching lessons, or passing down knowledge about the creatures that humans once lived alongside. Others propose that the art had a deeper, more spiritual function, acting as a conduit to the divine, allowing humans to connect with the spirits of the ancient creatures they had long revered. In either case, the bones of the creatures that once roamed the earth had a profound influence on how early humans created meaning and identity. But these bones also influence the social structure of early communities in ways that go beyond art and ritual. As humans began to domesticate animals and settle into more permanent lifestyles, the bones of ancient creatures may have served as status symbols or markers of power. The ownership of mammoth tusks, for example, could have been a sign of wealth and prestige, with those who controlled the largest and most impressive bones likely holding positions of influence within their communities. These bones weren't just relics, they were tangible representations of status, power, and the ability to control resources in a world where survival was often a daily struggle. As the world continued to change, early humans likely realized that the bones of these ancient creatures were also valuable tools for storytelling and myth-making. The stories of the great beasts that once roamed the earth, now extinct, would have been passed down from generation to generation. These stories didn't just serve to explain the past, they provided a framework for understanding the present. The creatures that left these bones behind were not just remnants of a bygone era, they were a part of the ongoing narrative of life, death, and rebirth. Early humans used these fossils to explain the cycles of nature, to teach their children about the world around them, and to keep alive the connection between the past and the present. The bones of these extinct creatures also likely shaped early human concepts of ancestry and heritage. Just as modern societies honor their ancestors through monuments and rituals, early humans may have revered the bones of these ancient creatures as symbols of the Earth's enduring power. These bones weren't just seen as the remains of animals, they were seen as the remains of a time when the Earth was different, when creatures roamed the land that were larger than life. In this sense, the bones became not just artifacts, but the physical embodiment of the Earth's deep history. They were relics of a time that could never be replicated, offering early humans a direct link to a distant, mysterious past. And as humans look to the future, these bones, with their connection to the past, likely inspired hope and a sense of continuity. Just as the bones of ancient creatures had survived for millennia, so too would early humans strive to ensure that their own survival was secured for future generations. The bones became part of the larger story of human existence, representing both what had been lost and what could still be gained. The presence of these fossils was a reminder that, despite the hardships of the Ice Age and the melting of the great ice sheets, life would continue and the Earth would always provide, just as it had in the distant past. But in a world of constant change and adaptation, how did early humans navigate the future with these ancient relics still in hand? How did they balance the reverence for the past with the need to innovate and survive in an increasingly complex world? As early humans continued to adapt to the post-Ice Age world, the bones of these extinct creatures remained a constant presence in their lives. The connection between past and present, ancient and modern, was more than just a physical one. It was a cultural, spiritual, and psychological bond that influenced the trajectory of early human societies. The bones weren't just artifacts or tools, they were symbols of survival, of resilience, and of a deep connection to the Earth. But as time passed and the Ice Age became a distant memory, early humans were no longer just surviving, they were beginning to thrive. The transition from a world of hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural societies brought about an evolution in how humans viewed their relationship with nature and the animals that had once shared the earth with them. With agriculture came more permanent settlements, the development of trade, and the rise of social structures. The world was rapidly changing, and the bones of ancient creatures, once symbols of mystery and awe, slowly transformed into something else, a link to the past that no longer felt as immediate or as relevant. However, the cultural and spiritual significance of these fossils didn't fade completely. While the practical needs of survival took precedence, early humans continued to honor the memory of the giants that once walked the earth. The bones, now integrated into the foundation of their rituals, began to symbolize the endurance of life and the continuity of the natural world. They became the foundation for the stories that explained the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, the very stories that early humans would pass down through generations. As agriculture became the backbone of human civilization, the understanding of the earth itself shifted. Humans began to view the land not just as a place to survive, but as something to cultivate, to nurture, and to mold. The bones of ancient creatures, though still revered, were no longer seen as the ultimate symbols of power. The natural world, once wild, untamed, and full of mysterious forces, became something that humans could harness. It was a shift that marked the beginning of a new era, one where humanity's role in the world was increasingly defined by mastery over nature, rather than living in harmony with it. Still, the legacy of those ancient creatures lived on in the myths, rituals, and spiritual practices that endured through the generations. The bones of mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats were no longer the primary symbols of power, but they remained an essential part of the cultural fabric. They were not just relics of the past. They were symbols of endurance, reminding early humans of their own resilience and adaptability in the face of change. They reminded humans that no matter how much the world transformed, there would always be a link to the past, a thread that connected them to the Earth's long, winding history. As humanity continued to evolve, the stories that grew from these bones, the myths of giants and gods, of creatures that once ruled the Earth, shaped the way early humans viewed their place in the world. These stories offered not just an explanation for the disappearance of ancient creatures, but also a framework for understanding their own existence. The bones served as a reminder that life, like the Earth itself, was cyclical. Creatures may disappear, but life would always find a way to continue, to adapt, and to evolve. This idea, passed down through generations, became the foundation for the belief systems that would shape human societies for millennia to come. In the end, early humans didn't just survive the great ice melt, they thrived. They adapted to the changing world around them, developing new technologies, new social structures, and new ways of thinking about their place in the world. The bones of extinct creatures, once a symbol of mystery and fear, became a symbol of continuity. They were a testament to the endurance of life, a reminder that even in the face of extinction, life finds a way to survive. As we look back on this incredible journey, we realize that the bones of these ancient creatures are not just relics, they are the foundation of our shared human story. They remind us that our survival depends not just on our ability to adapt to a changing world, but on our ability to connect with the past, to honor those who came before us, and to carry their stories forward. In the bones of the mammoths, the sloths, and the saber-toothed cats, we see not just the remnants of a forgotten time, but the enduring spirit of life itself.